Jason Quack. I'm the CTO of Devoteam Cloud Services. So a bit about my background. I'm a Google Cloud Certified Fellow in Hybrid Multi-Cloud area, and also a Google Developer Expert. So what it means is that I contribute back into the community about different kind of learning sessions and open source contributions, that kind of thing. So I believe really in giving back to the community. So I have a kind of a background in multi-cloud architecture in highly regulated environments such as financial institutions, telecommunications, and pharmaceutical space. About 15 years of experience in technology. Just a little bit about myself. So today previously we had ran a webinar on Anthos and kind of the technical aspects of it, how to build this architecture, and we had a feedback that we wanted to also see Anthos from a business point of view. So this is why kind of the driving force behind this follow-on webinar about what is Anthos, how is it useful, how can this actually help your company increase your revenue as well as cost savings, and also about the pricing of Anthos, how much it costs, and kind of steps to actually implement Anthos in your organization. So firstly, we have to understand about the different pieces of Anthos and what does it actually contain. So Anthos is a 100% software-based solution, which means that there is no hardware involved. The assumption is you have your own hardware if you are installing Anthos on premise or on the edge. So Anthos is a purely 100% software-based solution, and you buy licenses for it. So in Anthos, there's a few main pieces. So the first piece is in container management, what we call Anthos GKE. So GKE stands for Google Kubernetes Engine. So what does Anthos GKE mean? It means that you are able to install this standardized environment. So it's basically Kubernetes as how Google likes to run it on a cluster and with a managed control plane onto different environments. So you are now able to install Anthos GKE on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, on bare metal, which is kind of edge devices where I have a smaller footprint, or on-prem, which is more like kind of data center use case. And by purchasing this license, you are able to run this installer on all these environments, creating this standardized deployment framework foundation. You are also able to manage all your environments from one pane of glass, which is the Google Cloud Console. From Google Cloud Console, any cluster you register through the Anthos product, you will see it in the Google Cloud Console. And this Google Cloud Console also is protected using your cloud identity. So you sign in, and so authentication and authorization is managed through your single identity as well. And from this management plane, you can also see, for example, the different locations of your clusters, who is providing the clusters. Is it GCP? Is it on-prem? Is it AWS? As well as classifying according to different kind of security clusters. So one use case is normally you have clusters that have data locality restrictions. So you only to deploy certain databases on class 1 or class 2 security classes. So you're able to kind of configure them, arrange them, label them through this single pane of glass to manage it. In the second piece is the service management and operation management. So what this entails is, so now we have a standardized way to deploy Kubernetes clusters using Anthos, right, into different hyperscalers on-prem, on bare metal, on the edge. Now, in the complex application, you need to also understand how services talk to each other. For example, in this diagram, I have an example of like an international bank. So in this kind of architecture, normally you have online banking pieces, your web front end that talks to the consumers on a hyperscaler like Google Cloud, for example, because that enables you to scale up and down as needed. But for example, due to regulatory concerns, you need to store, for example, transaction data within the UK or within Germany or very specific or in Switzerland with complying regulations. as well as customer data, for example. You need to store it on-prem in certain, maybe you need control over the whole hardware stack. However, such a complex application can be hard to debug when you start to investigate what went wrong, right? If something happens, there's an outage. So Anthos Service Mesh and Cloud Operations Logging and Management, which are pieces of Anthos as well, gives you this capability to figure out which services talk to each other, what is the availability of those services, as well as what could have gone wrong in historical context. And the last piece is on policy management. Second last piece is on policy management. So Anthos also gives you the ability to, from a security point of view, define policy as rules, so declaratively. So your security team can go out and do their research, investigate, for example, that Postgres database or whatever database. They will only use a certain version of it because they have done the research, they investigated it, they've done penetrative attacks on it, and they do this recommendation throughout the organization. In a large enterprise, this can be hard to manage because you have to communicate with different departments. You have shadow IT, for example, that does their own installations. And it's kind of the onus is on the different owners. Well, in Anthos, each of your clusters will pull from a single source of truth. So your security team will write, for example, some declarative syntax saying that we only use version 5 of this database. And all your different clusters in all the different environments will start pulling this rule and implement this rule in all the deployments and start rejecting any installation, deployments, if it's not according to the security rules defined. So it kind of simplifies lives a little bit and keep things clean. And last thing is in the application development space, where you have things like GCP Marketplace and Cloud Run for Anthos. So what this means is reusing what has been done before. So GCP Marketplace allows you from the Google Cloud Console to deploy out of there's about 100 services you can deploy on Kubernetes, on Anthos clusters directly from the marketplace. So if you need Postgres SQL, you can just one click deploy into your edge location, for example. So one use case was they are now running this bare metal Anthos servers on MLB, Major League Baseball in the US. I assume for calculations on metrics and statistics. So this can be something that a remote location, you need to have Postgres SQL. Imagine the complexity of installing it on the server and then bringing it off location and having to manage that as well. With an Anthos connected cluster, you're able to do that from the marketplace and deploy this into your edge nodes on any Anthos nodes that has been installed with this Anthos license. If you need Elasticsearch, you can also do a one-click deployment. You need GitLab, you can do that as well. So there's a whole list of them on Google Marketplace. And what's great about this is that this installations has been vetted and kind of secured by different providers. So you know that it works, it has been kind of configured in the right way and optimized as well. So it's about reusing what's been done before and kind of increasing the development time. So these are kind of the key functionalities of Anthos at a very high level, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about why is it useful. So this is kind of like a very broad slide about how Anthos empowers organizations by saving the cost and increasing the revenue. But I'm going to dive deeper into each of these different metrics. So you're saying that there is a 5 times return on investment in deploying Anthos, which means that based on the license cost, you will gain back 5 times in terms of investment, in terms of revenue and cost savings. There is a 13 times improvement in time to market. This is just simply about how fast can you build new features and reach to your audience. Because as we are now moving into this new reality where your consumers are now sitting at home, purchasing more from the internet, but features are kind of a new superpower, right? The ability to build new features that cater to your market can make the difference between bottom line to an organization. And we will show you how Anthos empowers you to do that. There's also a 4% increase in application migration and modernization. So I'll go into more detail about what that means, because we all know that in the enterprise there or in your organization there are legacy applications, and you have to maintain that as well. There is a 30% reduction in non-coding activities for developers. So you're paying the developers to build features, right? To build code so that you can better retain your customers, to give them what they need to kind of catch their attention. But a lot of this time that developers are spending on is things like configuration, debugging. So it can show you how, and by deploying Anthos, it can actually reduce those activities to concentrate on what truly matters, which is delivering value for the customer. And also how it can improve your productivity for security tasks. For example, like what I just mentioned, where your your team is investigating best practices. How do they actually ensure that these best practices are applied in a uniform manner across the organization? So we show you a path to that as well. And also the 55% increase in platform operations efficiency. This is about, if something goes wrong, how do you debug it? How do you find out the issue? How do you scale your operations? How do you split the responsibility between operations and developers? So you don't have like one developer doing everything, which kind of like, you have the separation of concerns so that you can operate more efficiently. And again, this is all based on this great article that Forrester Consulting had produced based on the total economic impact of Anthos. And I'm going to go in more detail about how they actually produce this report as well later on. So when dealing with legacy applications, right, there is a need to manage them because they are there and there's customers using them. So the normal life cycle for how you use Anthos to fix this problem is by first deploying Anthos GKE on Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, or on-prem, depending on your data locality requirements. You create an inventory list of all your legacy applications. And then there is a service called Migrate for Anthos. And what this service does actually is taking virtual machines on VMware and then creating a Docker file of it, so containerizing them automatically. What this gives you is kind of like a fat container. So as we all know, the container should be as slim as possible as microservice, but this gives you a way in. So you containerize into a fat container and you start running it on Anthos first. But what this gives you is the ability to bin pack. So you can pack in as much of these legacy applications to run Anthos. So things such as worrying about versionings of dependencies, underlying OS updates, all these things will now be handled by Anthos instead. So you upgrade Anthos, you upgrade that version, and you just have, and then you leave that worry to Anthos installation. And it gives the whole organization kind of like a uniform way to run your applications. So even though you are moving to a new way of containerization, you don't leave the old applications behind. They are still a container, even though they are a fat container. Then what you do then after that is you start to break out microservices from the monolith. So from a fat container, you start to say, okay, now I want to break out this transaction microservice, and only one by one. You break it out, you create a new container of it. And then with Anthos, we remember the point where I mentioned about seeing which services talk to each other. Within Anthos Service Mesh, you are also able to route different applications through Anthos Service Mesh, which is based on Istio. With that, you're able to break out microservices and route certain traffic to those microservices. So to the outside world, it will seem like you're still running a monolith, you're still running a legacy application, but on the back side of it, the back end, you are starting to now becoming more agile and moving to a modern architecture. So it's kind of like a path to modernizing your application landscape. That's why they mentioned there's an increase in the application migration and modernization. So you don't leave those things behind. Next, the speed of development. So traditional software development life cycles. You have a business need. You talk to your application architect. You try to figure it out. You plan your hardware. You provision it. You have to do an installation, configure it of web server, your database, It kind of take weeks. So I come from a background where everything you just mentioned there is all ticket based. And sometimes it is necessary to do that because you want to have control, right? You want to understand, you want to have approval process. And then after that, only then can the developer start to code. So after weeks of preparation, can actually the feature start to be built. And then the developer has to start installing dependencies. And the worst case scenario, even go back and re-architect, reconfigure, re-provision, things like this for your development, your staging environment, your production environment, so on and so forth. And worst thing, when you hit a performance issue later on, you have to test it, it doesn't scale, you have to go back and redo the whole process again. So this is kind of like my experience in the past when working on feature development that can really hamper the release of new features to the customer. Well, in the kind of the new cloud native way of development, kind of agile development, you have a kind of self-service concept, right? But what Anthos does is that it gives you the self-service concept, but still enables the governance team to keep control, to understand, to define rules that prevent the developers from doing something wrong. Like you develop an application, it has customer data, you should be only able to deploy on this cluster. So it kind of protects developer from making mistakes. So in the Anthos development lifecycle, you start with business need, you architect your application. And what's great about, so Anthos GKE is Kubernetes. What's great about Kubernetes as well is that it has an opinionated way of how you should build an application. So you should build it in terms of microservices. You should build it as stateless as possible, and you outsource your stateful workloads into a dedicated database. So the architecture becomes a little bit more straightforward because there is best practices that's kind of always exposed. So it's very opinionated way of how you should build an application. You provision an Anthos cluster, which can take minutes if you have everything set up correctly. And you start to deploy Kubernetes services. So these services are things like your web server, your database, and all these things you can just grab it off the marketplace or just deploy it from open source. And these are pre-configured and designed so you can get it running as soon as possible. When you deploy the service, the Kubernetes cluster starts to scale them up and it just runs, right? And you configure it using config map. So a developer can start to code in terms of hours instead of weeks. And this is kind of like the key importance here is that developer is able to build that feature faster. And in terms of when you and then the thing is that when you want to do performance testing, Kubernetes has inbuilt abilities to scale up. So we just create a new replica of the container, which means that by following this very opinionated way of building applications, the developer both can start faster and don't have to worry about certain things like performance because it's kind of designed in a way that you build applications if you follow the opinions of it. So you can really get reduction in the non-coding activities. And same here is it also forces you to split up your monoliths into microservices by making you reevaluate how large your container size is, what should be split out, and what should be stored where. So you're developing for scale and you're avoiding mistakes. So these mistakes come back to bite you later on, but by following this very opinionated way of building it on Anthos, on Kubernetes, you will avoid the mistakes. So the improvement in productivity for security tasks. So like I mentioned, you have a security team for enterprise and they go out and they do research and they investigate top security concerns, which they apply out to the whole organization. But one problem I often saw was the implementation of the results. So you make the research and it's really complete and comprehensive. But how do you actually apply it across the organization and make sure that it's being followed? Of course, this is something you have to prove to auditors, right? So the traditional way is that you go out and you conduct your own audit of your entire organization to make sure that, for example, that this version of database is used. Or you have a configuration database and you store line by line item or the virtual machines you have, the whole landscape, and this version is being used. While in Anthos, in the security team, what they do is that they write a few lines of code. They defined it as this concept called policy as code. So I will only use this version. I can only use this repository. I can only have containers that behave in this manner. You commit it as of this date is reviewed by by maybe your CISO, and after from that point on, Anthos is on Anthos' responsibility to basically take this policy and apply it to all the clusters, and ensure that there is governance, there is no security insecure services being used. So you can see there's really a big improvement on how you secure your environments across the enterprise as well, if you have a very good standardized base foundation. And the increase in platform operations efficiency is actually the power of really the Google Cloud Console, the ability to, from one single pane of glass, you can see in this example that you can see your different clusters across on-prem, across the cloud. You can see the security class. You can see that one cluster needs to be upgraded, so you can plan that in. You can see how much memory is being consumed, how much are you running out. You can create alerting from it, and basically kind of get like a health of everything that is running in your enterprise, and get a really good look, instead of the traditional way where you would require all the different cost centers, product owners to kind of fill up a spreadsheet, and you gather them together and you kind of create this list. Instead, through this, you get real-time feedback. You understand what is going on, and you can remove this shadow IT and all these kind of concerns. You're also able to debug your services, logs. You can get the logs from your bare metal nodes, from your on-prem nodes, from your nodes in AWS, in Google Cloud, in Azure, from one single pane of glass, which means your developers, when, for example, there's a big production issue on the bare metal node somewhere else, sitting in some offsite, right? Because you deploy it for a customer there. You're not able to access the node from the cloud and investigate the problem. So the logging, investigate the logs. So it's all available through this cloud console as well. And also you're also able to see which services are talking to each other. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there is a topology there, which shows you the different microservices, how they talk to each other, what is their availability, how fast they respond, and and are they communicating each other over, for example, MTLS. And also you're able to go back in time, which means that if you have an outage, maybe 10 hours ago, you're unable to do some online banking, your operations staff or your DevOps can actually go back in time 10 hours and see which microservices actually failed and crashed and restarted, things like this. And then you are able to basically find out issues faster, make your applications more dependable, and really provide to the customers the kind of dependable and featureful experience they kind of are requesting these days, really serving them well. So having the right tools is really important to deliver a good customer experience. So how can this increase my revenue? So I'm just going to go a little bit on this report. So this report, I have the link over here, which we can email out to everybody on the call after that. So what they did was that they interviewed 5 enterprise customers that are using Anthos today. So of course, these are kind of private customers. They don't want to be named, but Forrester had done this customer interviews, and they create what I call a composite organization. And in that composite organization, the rough average size was about 5 billion annual revenue, about 15,000 employees. So you can imagine it's quite a large organization that's using this kind of products. And they simulated Anthos usage of the year 1 consuming about 100 virtual CPUs, and year 2 500, and year 3 1,000. So you kind of see that this product is designed in a way that you start small, you try 100, and then you see that there is adoption, and you start to scale it up throughout the organization. So it's not really a big bang, but you can do a big bang, of course. But most customers do like to start introducing this and see, does it take? Does it make sense? Yeah. So based on these customer interviews and research and understanding of their business concerns and how they have deployed Anthos, and also the financial kind of benefits they get out of it, they produce this report of this composite organization. So it's called the TEI framework. So they have quantified the benefits. So they've seen that they're actually able to build faster application development. So they actually, because they calculate based on the number of developers the organizations hired, how much they pay them on a year-to-year basis, and they're able to figure out that there is on the worst case scenario, there's about 5.3 million in savings to 9.9 million in savings as a best case scenario. So it's kind of a band. They always do it as a kind of simulations of bands. They see that by having a consistent unified security policy, you're able to save about 5.3 million to 9.7 million over 3 years. And having a streamlined operations, ability to debug and find issues, to recover those clusters when it goes down, throw it away, recreate it. You're able to save 1.8 million to 4.2 million over 3 years. So having all this, implementing and rolling out Anthos to boost all these components, it creates this cost savings. But what also they found out was the accelerated development velocity. So, and which contributed to a lift in sales to over 3 to 19 million over 3 years. And what this means is that the ability to create these new features, to kind of delight your customers, delight your, if you do B2B or B2C, to be able to make sure your systems stay up, even though if like one issue very commonly during the whole pandemic crisis was those online shops have been bombarded with increase in volume. Being able to have a plan to scale it, even if you are bound to on-premise resources, really help them to boost the customer satisfaction and to retain their customers as well. And some of the unquantified benefits is things like enhanced employee experience, reduced risk of errors. You consolidate your legacy platforms. So this also contributes back to your operations or efficiency. Strengthen security and also reduction of infrastructure costs. So the ability to scale on-prem as well. That's something really great. Yep. So just go a little bit about the details of how, let me just check my time a little bit. I'll just speed it up. So just how they did it is through what I call a TEI framework, where based on percentage increase in revenue, based on customer-facing downtime events, based on how Anthos can help you to reduce those and improve your customer retention, you're able to calculate some metrics that you're able to then measure at a business level to see, does Anthos actually improve your business? And what's great is that since this framework is now released in the paper, we are also able to apply this framework to calculate for you and anywhere where Anthos wants to be deployed, and kind of create these figures. And you can try out your year one and see, does it hit those numbers? If it does, continue year two. So you can able to use this framework that is built to kind of reverse engineer that. So you can see on a high impact, where they calculate out, they predicted about a 4.8%, 4.8 times return on investment. Jumping into Anthos pricing. So this is about the initial investment. So now Anthos is kind of more flexible in terms of how you buy it. Previously, you just have to purchase a 1-year commit, but now you can do pay as you go. And you can see the pricing on Google Cloud if you run Anthos is the same as if you're running on AWS. And also, but on-prem is a bit more expensive. But if you like it and you want to go from pay as you go into a 1-year subscription, there will be a price drop and a discount. And one last thing I'd like to go through before we end the webinar, because we have 30 minutes, is also even you have Anthos and you want to deploy it, we still need to work on a few paths to kind of build out this multi-hybrid cloud strategy. And in this path, Devoteam has created 4 tracks to kind of improve the adoption of Anthos within the enterprise. So I'm just going to go over a few of this. One where I found is quite important is your cloud strategy alignment. is sitting down with the business owners to kind of figure out your baseline, understanding why do you want to implement Anthos? Is there something you need to fix? Who is in charge of defining your business outcome in terms of increased revenue, increased customer retention, increased cost savings? All these things should be defined into a cloud strategy. And from there on, you can build the statistics and metrics to measure. So even though we deploy Anthos, we can figure out, does it work for you, organization? And from then on, also defining the cloud center of excellence. So even if you deploy Anthos, we still need to create some guardrails, guidelines about how you should design applications on Kubernetes, selection of different tools, how databases should be deployed, how do you back up those databases. So really creating a repository of best practices. They can be basically communicated out to all the parts of the organization. And the last slide, I just want to take out a shout out to Devoteam Cloud Services. So working with us, we can help you really leverage Anthos to achieve this 4.8 times ROI. Because we have been awarded the Partner of the Year 2019 in the EMEA region, and we can provide engineering support, certified resources, consolidated billing for Google Cloud and G Suite, and also provide a technical account manager to kind of be your single point of contact, help you roll out this application so that you can achieve the kind of business benefits that we have seen in this report. So our website is on the bottom right corner, devoteamcloud.com. You can also email me if you need any questions, and if you want to talk about maybe next steps in terms of workshops or actually going for a POC proof of concept to trial out Anthos, please email sales at the se.dt.sales@devoteam.com. And that's it from me. I apologize for running over time by about 6 minutes. Do you have any questions? No? Okay, then great. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you found this useful, and talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.